It is time for a Chat with Pat.
Yes, and today we have with us Peter Giersch. And he has had a varied career in business, academia, and the arts. He's had a stint as a teacher and a nonprofit executive, and then he launched Cathedral Consulting Group, which oversees and oversaw its growth into a multinational, multi-million-dollar management consulting firm. And he is currently serving as founder of this and CEO, geez, I'll spit it out, of the Giersch Group. And he's published many Catholic books and a new one that is coming out, talking of St. Michelangelo, death, judgment, or of Michelangelo, he's not a saint, death, judgment, heaven, and hell in the Burgundy region. So hopefully I will get to talk to him about that someday. But today we are talking to him about an article he wrote for Catholic Exchange called The Doctrine of Conditional Joy. Welcome, Peter. How you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks, Pat. Good morning.
This is a great article. I loved it. Can you kind of give our audience just a look at what is the doctrine of conditional joy and where does it come from?
Yeah, it comes from G.K. Chesterton and his book Orthodoxy. And the first time I read it, I was just so fascinated by it.
Yeah.
He takes, G.K. Chesterton takes what we've all heard a million times in the book of Genesis, where God says you can eat from the fruit of any tree except the one. Mm-hmm. And we never really think about that rule that God gives to Adam and Eve. But Chesterton says, when you read fairy tales, they tell us all the foundational truths of life, and they help us to see them in a new way. So Chesterton likes he likens the injunction against eating from the fruit of the tree of the fruit of good and evil. He likens that to a fairy tale where the fairy godmother always says these crazy things like, you can live in a palace of gold if you do not say the word cow, or you can live happily ever after with the prince's wife as long as you never show her an onion, or the prince's daughter as long as you never show her an onion. Uh-huh. And there's always and he says, an incomprehensible joy rests upon an incomprehensible injunction, a rule, and you don't understand the rule. And I just thought that was such an interesting insight into sin, really.
Yes.
We never understand, why can't I do with this? Why can't I say this thing I want to say, or watch this movie I want to watch, or whatever,
Right.
So that's the doctrine of conditional joy.
I love that. And you talk about that we really have no standing when we talk about which to me, and maybe I'm reading this wrong, so tell me, Peter, it means, right, I don't have a right to these things. These are just pure gift, right? Absolutely,
and it goes back to the fairy tale again. I mean, you got to read the Ethics of Elfland. It's a chapter in Orthodoxy by G.K. Chesterton where he lays all this out. But he says, like the hero of the fairy tale is always destitute, broke, right? I mean, think of Jack and the Beanstalk. Like, they got nothing, right? And then the fairy godmother offers them this wonderful thing, like Cinderella too, right? She pours dirt and then she gets all this stuff. She says, you got to be home by midnight, or else the everything's going to disappear. And the way Chesterton puts it, he says, so if you say to the fairy godmother, why can't I stand on my head in the palace of glass? The fairy godmother might say, well, it comes to that, explain the palace of glass. Why is it here at all? And I said in my article, when we say, well, why would God condemn me to a miserable existence if I sin? You might say, well, explain why you exist at all.
Right.
So we don't. Everything's a gift. It's all a free gift, especially when you look back at Adam and Eve, right? I mean, like, they were created out of nothing, and here they are, and all they have to do is avoid this one tree, and they couldn't even do it.
And why do you think? And again, you say this very well in the article. Why do we have those rules, right? Why are those rules in place? Like for Adam and Eve, just don't eat of that one tree.
I think it's to help us realize that we don't own the place, that we don't own ourselves, that we're not gods, right? And I liken it in the article to those tenants that there was a landowner who built a wine press, and built a vineyard and a wine press and put a hedge around it and a wall and made it real beautiful. And then he hired some tenants to work it for him. But right away, the tenants thought they owned it. So every time the owner sent somebody to collect his produce, they beat him up. They ended up killing him. They ended up killing his son. They got it in their head that it was theirs. And I think we do the same thing. You know, we think that somehow we're the master of life and everything. And we don't even know how we got here, you know. And I think that one little rule that we don't understand, like to be home by midnight or don't say the word cow or don't eat from this tree, is there to tell us you're not the master of the universe. You're not God. That there is a God, and you have to obey even just this silly little thing just to keep you in your place, to keep you humble.
And there's certainly an element of trust there too, right? That I just have to, you know, I can't figure it out, but I have to trust. It comes to trusting whoever is telling you this, right? So,
well, it all comes down to that. Yeah, I'm reading Faustina's diary.
Oh yeah,
and it takes a long time, right?
Yeah.
So I'm pushing my way through it. But trust is the note, right? Of that whole symphony of her diary. It's all trust.
So one of the things you mention in the story is the Indiana Jones theory of life. What is that?
So the Indiana Jones theory of life is when we watch a movie like Indiana Jones, like everything goes wrong, right? Everything he does, time after time, just keeps going wrong. You know, you think he finally has the Ark, and you know somehow the Nazis get it back from him, and you know even when he knocks out that guard to take his uniform, the uniform doesn't fit. Right. So he's got to go get another guard and do it again. And that's the stuff we love about that. But then when those things happen to us in our life, we can't stand it, right? Anything goes wrong in our life, we're not happy. But when we're sitting watching a movie like that, that's what makes the movie so exciting.
Yeah. And so how do we then, because you say, you know, there's always obviously consequences. And some are what we call kind of final consequences. We see those in fairy tales a lot, but final consequences where they just lose it all. What and in our society today, we just think of that as so unloving and so unfair. But how should we look at that?
Well, I think we can't get away from the fact that if we go back to the parable of the tenants in the vineyard, you know, Jesus, after he tells that, says, you know, these tenants thought they owned the place. He says, what do you think the landowner's going to do to those tenants? And the apostles say, they're going to put those wretched men to a wicked death. Yeah. And Jesus doesn't say, oh, no, that would be too harsh. He's just going to give them a little slap on the wrist. He's just like, yep, you got it. You know, I mean, we have to, and to our sensibility, we'd be like, oh, that's so harsh, you know, to put those guys to death. You know, maybe they had a bad childhood, or you know, I mean, like we start making excuses for them. But that's not how the Bible is. That's not how Christ's words are. You know, it's certainly not the, you know, the Matthew 25, the parable of the sheep and the goats. Yeah. Those people who are called to go to heaven, they don't even know what they did right, and the people sent to hell, they don't even know what they did wrong. You know, like when did I see you, you know, naked and hungry? Well, you did it for this person, right? So they just obeyed the rules, even though they didn't understand them. And that's, you know, and there's this, there's this finality to the punishment in the Bible that I think we've forgotten about, which of course is hell.
Yeah. Thank you, Peter. This was a lovely article. Thanks so much for writing it.
You bet. Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, have a great week ahead.